Hello, my name is Drees Nation, and today I'm going to be producing a new video that is going to be an update to my original tuning video. Just to recap, for anyone who remembers their first attempts to tune in Forza, you surely know that tuning is difficult and sometimes aggravating. The in-game descriptions are vague, adjustments seemingly have no effect, and there are just too many unknown variables to really trust that any adjustment is the correct one. I'm Drees Nation, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my system for tuning that creates fast and consistent cars. Before I get started, there are a few things I should mention. First, make sure that you're extremely familiar with the track that you plan on tuning your car for. Next, realize that my rules are simply soft guidelines to shoot for. Because everyone is different, yours should be different than mine, just slightly. Also, before you get into tuning your car, please write down your car's weight ratio, because it'll be needed later on. And then lastly, it's necessary to say that this process should be completed 2 to 3 times before your tune is complete. The reason for this is that changes in settings create minor changes in other settings that must be accounted for. And so if you do it multiple times, your car will even out and it will perform optimally. So step 1 is always adjusting the brake pressure. As I said before, what I'm looking for is a car that's at its limit of its stopping ability when I am braking at my maximum force. If the car is skidding, you can monitor this using the traction telemetry. If the car is skidding, then you need to back off on the pressure of the brakes, and then vice versa. If it's not even skidding at all and your brake distance is massive, then you need to up the pressure. Keep in mind while you're doing this that there is a possibility that the front to rear ratio may need to be adjusted as well. If only the front tires are skidding and the rear ones are not, that is a very good indication that the front of the car has too much braking bias and you need to adjust accordingly. The next thing to work towards is adjusting the spring compression. First off, we're going to be monitoring the spring compression during straight line braking only. This time you're going to open up your telemetry to the spring compression. You want the front springs to compress somewhere between 0.7 and 0.75. Obviously there might be some numbers that'll jump above, some numbers that will be below, but 0.7 to 0.75 is the largest number of numbers that you should be seeing while you brake. If your numbers are consistently higher than this, then your car is actually transferring too much weight to the front of the car when you brake. And what this will do is this will force too much pressure to the front of the tires, not enough to the back tires, and your stopping distance will increase significantly. Vice versa, if your spring is not compressing very much, that means your springs are too stiff, and you will notice that your car will have difficulty absorbing the bumps around the track and maintaining proper traction. And this will increase, once again, your braking distance, and it will also increase and limit your car's traction through turns. Once the front spring force is adjusted properly, then go ahead and adjust the rear spring force to be equal in accordance with the car's weight ratio. If you suck at math, the formula is R, which is the rear spring value, is equal to F, the front spring value, multiplied by the value 1 minus D, which is the rate ratio, all of that over D. Next, we will look at spring compression during sustained turning. Good turn to look at this is Catalonia's turn 3. Go ahead and open up your telemetry once again to spring compression. During sustained turning, you want to monitor the front outside spring only, and you're looking for it to compress the bulk of its numbers somewhere between 0.65 and 0.7. Any more than this, and you risk the springs reaching 100% compression during numerous turns on tracks where you're going to be braking and turning at the same time. If your springs go all the way to 100, then they cannot compress any further. You lose traction on that tire, and quite often you'll lose control of the car completely. We don't want it to, conversely, be less than these numbers, because then once again we will notice that the car will be unable to absorb the bumps and will be losing traction during its turn. To adjust the lateral spring compression, you're going to be changing your roll bars. Stiffer roll bars will reduce the compression, while looser roll bars will allow the springs to compress more. At this point, keep the roll bars equal to each other. We will be adjusting the rears later. At this point, you've had enough time going around the track that your tires should be heated up properly. Open up our PSI, camber, toe, caster measurements in the telemetry. While hot, we want our tires to be somewhere between 32 and 33 PSI. I don't even worry about the temperature. Camber is a hard thing to monitor and to lock down as to what is exactly you should do. My starting point, usually for most cars, is -2 degrees on the front and -1.5 in the back. Later on, after we notice how the car's handling, we can then adjust these later on. Once again, toe will fall under this, have a simple preset, and then adjust it later on. For toe, I usually do a +0.02 and -0.1 in the back. And then caster, I usually set somewhere between 5 and 6. Much more recently, I've been consistently setting most of my cars like about 5.8 to 6. Next thing to adjust is the aero, and we are going to be looking at balancing the car and how it turns at high speeds. If the front of the car lacks grip at really high speeds, this is an indication that there's not enough aero force in the front, and go ahead and increase the front aero. Vice versa, if you keep losing the rear end of the car a lot during high speed turns, then go ahead and increase the rear aero. Obviously, keep in mind the amount of force that putting on the car is going to increase tire wear, fuel consumption, things like that, and it might actually be beneficial to, rather than increasing one side, actually decreasing the side that has more traction. But that is on a car-to-car basis for the decision for that. After we have balanced the car moving at high speeds, then we can balance the car going through turns at moderate speeds. Catalunia's turn 4 is a good example of this, and here we will only be adjusting the rear roll bar stiffness. If the car is pushing during turns at moderate speeds, that means the car has more grip in the rear than in the front. Since we've already established that the front of the car has the maximum amount of traction we can possibly give it, it is okay now to actually reduce the traction in the rear of the car and increase the stiffness of our rear roll bars. The goal is to have the car be very balanced and be sliding equally front and the back as you go through a turn. If one side of the car is sliding more than the other, you need to adjust that rear roll bar to get the car to be completely balanced throughout this moderate speed turn. The next part of the tuning process is now a much more by feel type of process, and what we're looking for is how the car handles entering, exiting turns, as well as throttle problems and deceleration problems with your car. Me, because I drive with traction control, good start point for my differentials is usually 85% for both the acceleration and the deceleration, and 10, 10, 6.6, 6.6 for the rebound and bump settings. If the car feels overall sluggish, it's not really willing to turn, this could be indicative that your rebound and bump are much too high or much too low. Consider centering them to a more moderate number. So for example, let's say you're at 12 and it feels sluggish, go ahead and drop it down to 9, see how it feels there. If you're all the way down at 6 and then it feels sluggish again, consider bringing it up to 9, things like that. If you want more responsiveness from one end of your car or another, consider reducing the rebound and bump at that end of the car. If a car conversely is too grippy at one end, consider increasing the rebound and bump. Also, if the car is very, very willing to turn into turns, even though it doesn't have actually, it's like it's going to spin out, right? But it's willing to turn, that's indicative that your toe is too large. Conversely, if it's not willing to turn in at all, then your toe is not enough and you need to increase it. Next, if you're losing traction while you're decelerating going into a turn, that is indicative of problems with your deceleration differential. You may need to increase your differential or decrease it. It really depends on where your current setting is and what your specific car is, and if you have traction control on or not. A good example of how widespread possibilities for this are is on such as like the R-Class Aston Martin. My rear differential is 65%, but it's all the way up to 90% for the 458 Italia because the rear end of the car really wants to come out. Lastly, if your car is either super willing to kick out during acceleration or it's pushing during acceleration, this is usually indicative of your problems with your acceleration differential. Once again, adjust accordingly. At this point of the tuning, right, your rebound and bump, your toe, your camber, all these things, they are more for feel than for like there's a specific right and a wrong. As for camber, most of my settings, especially if they're on race tires, are usually, like I said, -2.8 all the way down to about 2 is the least amount of camber I'll have in the front. I'll go all the way up to -2.5 in the rear and then down to -1.5 in the rear, depending on the car. Usually, the more turns that car is going to be facing during the race, you're going to increase your camber towards the maximum limit. And then if it's more of like a straight line, let's say you're just going around Indianapolis, careless or something like that, then you're going to want it much closer towards your bottom limit. Once again, this is all about feel. At this point, the tuning starts over. Changing all of these settings will have made changes that must be re-evaluated. Perhaps your braking distance has increased. Perhaps your balance through turns has changed. All of these settings must be re-evaluated. If you have trouble reading numbers on your telemetry during a test drive, go ahead and start a short race, and then afterwards go to replay and inspect the telemetry in slow motion. I hope this helps you guys. Have fun racing.